Thank you very much, Fred. It's actually much worse than you think as far as the God of the Old Testament is concerned. Let me take you back about when I was just starting as a minister, an evening service in Redcliffe Bay Methodist Church. Congregation, 12 old ladies, myself and a gentleman called Mike, who was an ex-Royal Naval officer, wonderful voice, and he was reading the lesson, which was Deuteronomy 24, beginning at verse 10, which is a very nice piece of what's called the Holiness Code in Deuteronomy, which tells you to be nice to immigrants, because that's in there as well, and widows and orphans. Only because of the layout of the New English Bible, he began reading at Deuteronomy 23, verse 10. If one of you is unclean because of what happens to him at night, he shall go outside and wash himself, because I will have nothing unclean within my camp. Now, the congregation began to wake up here. They didn't know all this stuff was in there. You shall have a trowel among your equipment. And when you are caught short, or some other banal expression, you shall dig a hole and squat and relieve yourselves. I shall have nothing unclean among my people in my camp. Now, I was thinking at this point, how am I going to preach on this? It's very interesting. And then he went on to describe in some detail some of the sort of verses that you find so objectionable, in this case what to do with male temple prostitutes. Now, the male temple prostitute was a species of person which most of the congregation didn't know existed. And I was intrigued and fascinated. So it's all in there, you're right. I will come back if you want to your reading of the scriptures, which I have to say to you, I'm afraid, is very inaccurate and impartial, based on Kautsky's somewhat banal appropriation of Christian biblical criticism in his own country, Germany, which was, well, that's a big topic. We might come back if you want to the Gospels and their role, but I don't want to do that. I want to start with some areas of agreement that I think we have between us, Marxists and Christians. By the way, from my own background, I was brought up as an atheist.
That's good.
My family's roots are in Northern Ireland, which we left when I was about 8, came to England. I lost my accent, it was beaten out of me, quite literally, in an English school. And my father was an atheist. His father, my grandfather, had read Nietzsche, and had come to the conclusion that they, the churches, only speak like that because they have no claws. That Christianity was, as Fred I think has pointed, a sklavenmoral, the morality of slaves, by which the slave brings down that which is noble and good and true, by appealing to the guilt and the weakest side of the Übermensch, the person who really moves societies. Let's not go into dialogue with Nietzscheans. I've had a lot of that in my time. But my father was an atheist. But my goodness, he was a Protestant atheist. And I do fully agree with you with the way that Christianity can be appropriated as a tribal badge of identity. And it is clearly nothing to do with the genuine article. What is the genuine article? What links Gene Robinson, the gay bishop of wherever it is in the States, an Ethiopic monk, and, I don't know, a redneck, what's the name, Palin, what links them? I don't know. I can't speak about them, but I will try and talk to what Richard Baxter called mere Christianity. Some basic ideas, which I think, in many ways, align us with Marxism. After all, what links a Poom militiaman in 1938, Chinese Red Guard in 1968, and a member of the International Marxist Workers in 2008. Well, they are all recognisably, I think, in some ways Marxist. They're working to a tradition. And I'm so glad the tradition has survived, by the way. I thought you'd all died out. Thank God you're all here. Firstly, the first, and actually in many ways the most important area of agreement, will surprise you. Berkeley idealism, which Fred referred to in such an erudite and helpful way, is an aberration. I mean, Berkeley was trying to defend Christianity against a very crude materialism, and he just turned their arguments rhetorically brilliantly on their head. But this is not mainstream Christianity. In fact, mainstream Christianity is not strongly dualistic. That is to say, just as Marxists talk about matter and mind, but they are referring to very much two sides of one coin. If Christianity talks about spirit and substance, or spirit and the flesh, it's not talking about two separate, opposed things. It's talking about two sides of the same coin. There is only one reality. We do not think that there is this hidden veil thing that in this world we must bow to and is superior. There is the one reality. And this is signalled in classical Christianity by the rejection of something called Docetism. Now this is a doctrine about Christ. And it comes from the Greek word doketai, meaning to seem. And there were those in the early churches who taught that Christ was a divine being, as it were, disguised in a thin veil of humanity. And this doctrine is decisively rejected whenever it is discussed. No, the Orthodox confession is that Christ is fully human and fully divine. A much more difficult and paradoxical teaching, but the church has to cling to it because it wants to assert that he is bone of our bone, flesh of our flesh. That this world is real, that he bled and suffered and had a runny nose. He really was human. Docetism is rejected. And another difficult doctrine in the context of the Greek world, where the accepted notion was, as the Greeks put it, soma sema. The body is a tomb. But what is real within us is this immortal spark, which when we die is released. The church decisively rejects that and teaches and proclaims the much more difficult doctrine of the resurrection of the body. A much more difficult, but in fact the only philosophically comprehensible account of a life after death that I can get my head around is the idea that as it were, we would continue in some way embodied, because the only human life I know is an embodied life. I cannot conceive of some sort of spiritualist concept where heaven is just like Neasden, but there's not so much traffic. That just makes no sense. We float around, ectoplasm. The resurrection of the body. And these doctrines signal that the church is not committed to a strong dualism, just as Marxism is not. And it follows from that an even deeper agreement. History counts. History is important and meaningful. We can tell, as it were, a story about history. And Marxists tell your stories. And we tell our story. And we are, interestingly, both held to account and embarrassed by history. Marxists are embarrassed by the fact that actually the final crisis of capitalism keeps on seeming to postpone itself. You might be a bit more hopeful now. Yeah, well I can see that, yes. But nevertheless, be prepared to be disappointed. We certainly are disappointed by the failure of the parousia, the second coming of the Lord Jesus.
Which also keeps getting put off.
That also keeps getting put off. You see, we're in the same boat, friends. Because for us, actually, and I don't mean to be at all flippant here, history counts. Because there is only one reality. And here we are very clearly together against, say, the representatives of Eastern religions, in which history is cyclical, repeats itself, is going nowhere in particular. That certainly is the Buddhist and Hindu account. and perhaps more seriously against those postmodernists who distrust all these things they call meta-narratives. Yes, we are together. And this, of course, explains, and I perhaps if we have more time in the question and answers, I can talk about the deep engagement between Christianity and Marxism in South America and in Asia.